Hey everyone, I'm Princess Link, and welcome back to Metal Gear Solid 4. Chapter 2. As we always did before a job, Snake and I walked together. Where we went was never important, whether a park or the streets near a hideout. Before engaging in a dangerous mission as part of our anti-Metal Gear, anti-Patriot activities, the two of us went on a walk. As long as the sky was above our heads, we didn't care where. This time, we strolled Missouri's deck. I was never a believer in the so-called good old days, but the wooden deck was top class and top quality, well polished and pristine. A museum ship in Hawaii until recently. The vessel had been carefully preserved. In terms of pure aesthetics, the meticulously polished deck was a class apart from the modern metal numbers, slathered with a mixture of shoddy-looking blue paint and poised sand for better traction. Snake asked me, "How was Raiden?" Raiden had severed his right arm to escape the rebel, and the arsenal had crushed his left. It's a book. They made a movie about it where the guy was stuck under the rock, and then he cut off his arm, but without the domestic abuse allegations. No, because I had to read it. I was looking for it because it was on the list for Reading Olympics one year, and so I looked it up to see what the guy who wrote it, and it's the author of I don't remember what it's called. It's 152 hours or something. I don't remember. But anyway, I was looking it up, and it's the author of the book is accused of domestic abuse, and it's okay, why? What the heck? Anyway. He'll live, I said, but he's in no shape to fight. Best to let him rest. Raiden likely owed his life to his body's cybernetic tissue closing capability. Losing an entire arm, let alone two, was a potentially fatal wound. But when the flow of blood and energy can be disengaged from the limbs, preventing any further losses, such injuries became vastly preferable to what Vamp had done to him in South America. With multiple stab wounds over his entire torso, closing down those tissues would have rendered Raiden immobile. Snake seemed relieved to hear that Raiden wouldn't be joining the fight. "The only people I have left to rely on," Snake said, "are Meryl and..." He looked across the deck's expanse to the port side of the ship where Akiba was walking, hunched over and unsteady. Perpetually at the mercy of his bowels, Johnny was a young man in great difficulty. I feel bad for him. I feel bad for Johnny. It's not his fault. He has digestive issues. I shrugged and said, "Kind of an unknown quantity, isn't he?" Akiba felt restless because of his ever-worsening stomach, but the other soldiers were similarly ill at ease, nervously fidgeting and glancing in all directions. Without the SOP's control, they were no longer able to hold back their fear and excitement for battle. "Everybody's losing their nerve," I said. "Without the system to protect them, I hear that a lot of soldiers are deserting because the SOP's after effects are so bad." Then I heard a familiar voice. I hooked Akiba up with a naked M82. I turned to see Drebin sitting above us atop the massive barrel of a 16-inch gun turret, his pinstripe suit appearing entirely out of place. Drebin raised a can of Nightcola in greeting and said, "Fancy meeting you here." "What are you doing here?" Snake asked. "I laundered these guys' IDs, then issued them new naked guns, including that catapult you're going to be riding." Drebin gestured with the can toward the row of what, at first glance, looked like anti-aircraft guns affixed to the wooden deck, the human catapults that would launch the strike team onto Haven. "Business has been slow," Drebin said, "ever since Liquid got his hands on GW. His extra orders stopped coming in. Now that all the weapons all over the world are locked, the only ones still looking to fight would be you and yours. Apparently everyone else thinks it's not economical to replace all the useless equipment with my stuff." He shrugged. "So I made an extra special trip out here just for you. This guy must have some taste for danger," I thought. "Drebin!" Snake said. Do you have even the slightest idea what's going on? Of course I do. Behind the sunglasses, Drebin's eyes narrowed in delight. He held out the aluminum can. See, when it comes down to it, the world's like this soda here. Once the fizz is gone, I ain't got no use for it. It's got no worth. He paused to let his message sink in. I'm on the side of whoever needs me most. You dig? Then Drebin made his dreamlike gesture, pointing first at his eyes, then at Snake. Unable to decide what, if anything, he had up his sleeve, Snake and I left the peculiar man and resumed our walk across the Missouri's deck. To Snake, I'm like, Soto Woke? What is that? What the frick does that mean? What are you doing? I don't know what that means. I don't know. Is it Latin? I don't know. Wait, woke means... I don't know. I took like half a year Latin. Okay? Because thanks to the pandemic. He can't be here just for business. I shudder to think someone would be here for the fun of it. Snake shook his head and said, I strongly suspect this is more than a hobby for him. Why was Drebin following us everywhere we went? The man certainly seemed to be enjoying himself, but I'd have had to be crazy to think he'd gone across the world and back with us just for fun. The horizon where Liquid would soon surface was quiet and still, without any large waves, perhaps in awareness of the gravity of the coming battle. As we cut through the peaceful waters, I turned my gaze back to the majesty of the aged battleship. Maybe she hadn't half the arsenal's stupefying size, but Missouri's superstructure, with a unified bridge, smokestacks, and near rangefinder, stood stern and imposing, like a medieval castle. She was the epitome of a battleship, with a fatherly ruggedness, not at all similar to the Arsenal-class Havens founded. What are you doing? It's so old. Are you serious? What? Oh my god. Come on. No, come here. Oh my god. You wanna say hi? You wanna say hi? Say hi. As befitting a sea vessel, Missouri would always be referred to as she. But have no doubts, Missouri was a man, and a resolute father at that. That's sexist! The ship carried scars from her many battles. Walking from aft to fore along the starboard side, Snake noticed part of the hull was significantly bent. Snake patted his pockets for a secret. That's a fairly large dent. I nodded. A Zero put that there. A kamikaze in the Pacific War. A Zero, huh? This ship has many stories. She's been around longer than either of us. The Japanese foreign minister signed the instrument of surrender on this deck, you know. Where? Snake looked across the deck. Several of the ship's crew were working, busily preparing for the fight to come. I think there's a plaque somewhere, I said. Mei Ling would know. A hull bent by a Zero and a plate to show where Japan signed surrender. Marks of the history she's witnessed. Right, I said. Everything has a tale. Not just people, but ships, buildings, even simple objects. All of us. And you've taken on Naomi's story. You finished her one cluster. Actually, Sunny's the one who finished it, although she was only one of 3 to write the code. Snake managed to find a cigarette and put it to his mouth. His lips tightened, his skeptical expression asking, Sunny, Naomi, and who else? Snake was right to be curious. He knew I hadn't contributed to any of the programming. I took out a lighter and, covering the flame with one hand to protect it from the sea breeze, let Snake smoke. Then I said, Sunny went fishing through the Gaudis libraries to see if there was any source code she could use to complete the program. What she found was Emma's worm cluster. Snake didn't say anything, but just looked into my face. My sister, a specialist in high-volume data analysis, had written the program to destroy GW, and she knew well how to destroy the AI, having designed it herself. Sunny took my sister's code and worked it into Naomi's program. But what I didn't have time to look over every single line, but what I did see reminded me of Emma, like she'd left traces of herself in the way she coded. Even programming code could hold a story. Programs were more than numbers and instructions, but records of another world. The cluster was part of Emma's story, proof that Emma Emmerich Danzinger had once lived, and she had told many stories. Snake, engrossed in my talk, had forgotten to breathe, and began coughing on his own cigarette smoke. How do you... I made a wry smile, patted his back, and said, but this worm cluster that Sunny created, it's even better than Emma's. Sunny's worm destroys the AI's intellect by triggering apoptosis. Once uploaded into GW, it should do some real damage. I continued to comfort Snake and was struck again by how terribly weak he had become. Touching my hand to his back, I could feel that the strength that had once roused the legendary man no longer remained in the aged body. "You're dead set on going to Haven yourself?" I asked, but I knew there was no point in asking. When I tried to tell him to give up before he went to Shadow Moses, he wouldn't listen. "We started this," he'd said, before descending to the island in the bitter cold his old body couldn't withstand. "I still have things left to do besides smoke." Snake moved as if to toss his cigarette in the ocean. He returned my disapproving look with a grin and took out his portable ashtray and used it. I hadn't made a face at its littering, but rather at why this man had to shoulder the sins of mankind, and at why he would be leaving us. He was the same with Fank. Snake hadn't wanted things to end that way. Irrational fate brought the two men together, and in the end compelled them to fight. Snake wasn't to blame for defeating Fank Yeager, and Snake wasn't the one who made Fank the experimental subject for the powered exoskeleton project. Yeah, that's what I've been saying. Hi. Gray Fox was the one who decided to fight Snake, okay? He also set Snake on fire. Fun fact. Play Metal Gear 2. Or don't, I don't care. But Snake attracted tragedy. He stewarded the sins of others. At Shadow Moses, he drew Naomi's hate, and now he was ready to put a conclusion to it all before embracing his death. Another coughing fit overcame Snake, and when it passed, he remained bent over, hands on his knees. He looked up at me and said, "What about you, Otacon? Have you thought about leaving the ship?" Snake had always brushed aside any concern offered him. Even in his current state, he suddenly pressed ahead to fulfill his duty. But now with Snake worrying about me, I found myself answering as he would. We were two pig-headed men. "Stop it," I said. "I've still got things to do myself. And I don't even smoke."
"Snake,"
Campbell said.
"can you hear me?"
On my notebook screen. I'm assuming that means like a laptop, like a MacBook. That's what he has in the game. Which is so funny. It's literally so funny that it's just Apple products. Speaking of Apple products, if Apple supplies products for like a movie, none of the like villains are allowed to use them. Like, it's like a whole article about Knives Out. Like, Chris Evans's character is like the only one without an iPhone, and he's like the murderer or whatever. Like, because he wasn't, because he was the murderer, so he wasn't allowed to use the Apple product. So the colonel, on my notebook screen, the colonel's face appeared stiff. I had called Snake and Meryl back to the vacant briefing room to hear Campbell's report. Meryl didn't like having to meet with a man, even across the computer screen, but Snake asked her and she couldn't refuse him.
"Liquid's warship, Outer Haven,"
Campbell said.
"is a modified version of an Arsenal-class model stolen from the Patriots."
The first Arsenal-class ship had been secretly constructed in New York Bay. Solidus's terrorist plot, intended to locate information on the Patriots hidden within GW, resulted in the ship grounding on the island of Manhattan, destroying several buildings. The true story was hidden from the public, and the shocking event went down as the largest naval accident in history, attributed as a software error in the Arsenal's navigation systems. something akin to the Divide by Zero glitch that left a cruiser running Windows NT dead in the water off the coast of Virginia.
After the Manhattan accident, Campbell explained, public criticism of the military swelled, and between oversight committees and a spate of new laws monitoring safety and operations, the U.S. Armed Forces were paralyzed. PMCs gained prominence, and the war economy pervaded the global marketplace. Looking back on the events, I wouldn't be surprised if Liquid or the Patriots had planned it all.
According to Campbell's information, the Patriots had built several more Arsenal-class ships, even after the original had been so publicly exposed. When Liquid took over Ocelot's body, he might have gained knowledge of the ships dwelling beneath the seas. The colonel continued,
Liquid has the warship crawling with Irvings and other unmanned weapons. According to Naomi's data, Haven is crewed by a battalion of enhanced soldiers, each called from the best PMC has to offer, from Praying Mantis to Ravensword.
Through the monitor, Campbell looked at Meryl. She stood some distance behind us, toward the back of the room, yet she became flustered under the gaze of her father and looked away. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, was about to embark on a desperate mission to infiltrate the ship where Liquid's PMC awaited. Campbell kept his composure as best he could, but a new gut-wrenching emotion consumed him as he watched his daughter.
Please bring her with you to the briefing,
Campbell had asked me. Lacking confidence that I could convince her, I ended up leaving it to Snake. The colonel had much to say to her, to his unknowing daughter, to whom he had never permitted himself to confess his illegitimate fatherhood. But now, as every man and woman aboard the battleship stood ready before the fateful moment, this father and daughter had not been afforded the time to say what they needed to say. With or without the time, the two preserved a measured distance, unable to make themselves tell the tales they needed to tell.
If Liquid succeeds in destroying JD, Campbell said, and gains control of the Patriot system, he'll make Haven his flagship, and his PMCs will spread like wildfire across the globe.
Still, Liquid's claim to destroy JD was undoubtedly a considerable gamble. The more I thought about it, shooting a railgun nuke at a satellite traveling 10 kilometers per second bordered on the outrageous. Of course it does, it's Metal Gear. Nothing can be normal in these games. Missile-based anti-satellite weapons were developed by both America and the USSR during the Cold War. The early 21st century saw China successfully test an anti-satellite weapon system, and in 2008, the U.S. Navy shot down a malfunctioning spy satellite with a missile launched from an Aegis cruiser. That satellite was traveling at a little under 8 kilometers per second. The missile flew at it head-on at a speed between 3 and 4 kilometers per second, making their respective velocity somewhere around 11 kilometers per second. But missiles could be controlled after launch. A railgun, however, was essentially a cannon. Once its warhead was fired, the trajectory was largely fixed. With terrestrial targets, stabilizing pins could provide a form of last-moment guidance, but at JD's orbit, the atmosphere was sparse and fins meant little. Moreover, this cannon floated on the ocean. No matter how large the ship, no matter what kinds of stabilizers were on board, maintaining perfect stationary firing conditions would be nigh impossible. Liquid had everything riding on one moment, just as we had everything riding on this one battle.
This is our last chance, Campbell said, to stop Liquid from global domination.
I knew that. Snake and Meryl knew that. I couldn't bear to see Campbell making the same mistake I had made. Don't you have something important to say right now? In those last moments, I hadn't been able to call Emma by her name. Call me by your name.
Wait. No, that's weird.
I hadn't been able to tell Wolf how I felt. I hadn't understood my own dying wish. I mean, considering she didn't actually die until after they left. Just the best. I think they just go off and Naomi's still alive. Not like this, Colonel. Time is something neither will have. Time is something people never have. If you two keep up this measured distance, neither of you will ever tell each other anything. Yet still we languish in delay. Then, as if in disregard for my exasperation, an alarm rang through the ship, and a voice came over the ship's speakers. A large object is rapidly surfacing. We can't verify this object, but measurements are in line with an Arsenal-class vessel. Proceed for visual confirmation. Even behind the closed door to the briefing room, we could hear the footsteps of crew running down the passageways to the deck. Amid the suddenly hectic mood, I sighed and shook my head, and looked to Merrill. As the alarm continued its grating clamor, Snake held his eyes on Campbell in silent criticism of his old friend's cowardice. Merrill simply kept staring at the floor with no indication she would return Campbell's gaze. "You have to say something. Now is the time." I glared at the father on the other side of the computer screen, trying to spur him on to action with my eyes. But Campbell's mouth was half open, mute and frozen in search of words. Snake jerked his head to beckon me. Liquid's drip was surfacing and we had to get moving. Giving up on Campbell, we reluctantly turned our backs to the monitor. As Snake and I left the room, we could hear Campbell softly begin to speak.
"Merrill,"
He said.
"could you hear me?"
His was the voice of a father taking the first steps toward responsibility to his daughter. If you like that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!